Nell, welcome to the drum.
Oh, well, thank you very much for having me. It's an absolute pleasure.
Is this something we really need to know about, or is this just a way to define yet another thing to make us feel bad?
Well, there is that sort of, there is that the sort of concern that if we section off every section of a woman's life, does we just create a catalogue of anxieties for people that would otherwise stream along happily? I have to say, as someone who went through the panic years without a shorthand for it and without a vocabulary to describe it, it did not make it any easier for me to bear. And the reason that I wanted to write the book and to give this thing a name was essentially because I felt at the time that it was so misunderstood, and without that ability to kind of say to my peers and my employers and my family, something's happening to me, and I feel like I'm sort of trying to crawl through a web of interconnected decisions that in order to unravel one, I might accidentally unravel all of my life. I remember thinking that this doesn't happen when you are in what we call adolescence and going through the biological transition that we call puberty. And this doesn't now happen when you're in your midlife and you're going through the biological transition that we call menopause. And so wouldn't it be great if, when you were sort of heading into all of these decisions about your fertility, the kind of relationship you want to have, the nature of work that you want to do, how important money and your career and your potential to have children is, if instead of having to go into the kind of the sort of meaty, sweaty details of all of those things, we could just say to someone, yeah, I think I'm in my panic years. And they'd say, oh, me too. Like, yeah, mine started when I broke up with my boyfriend. Do you want me to come around with a lasagna and we'll talk about how you're feeling? And I just thought, like, that would be, it if you have language, you can basically exercise empathy with people in a way that you can't without it. So while I don't want anyone who is an otherwise happy 29-year-old to feel like she is sliding down a log flume towards necessary unhappiness, I more want to say, wherever you are in this journey, if you are feeling in this sort of conundrum, you're not alone. Like, thousands of other people, particularly cisgendered women, have been there before and will be coming along right alongside you and after you. And so maybe we can all help each other out here. And maybe if we all start talking about it more openly, and if we all allow each other the space to express those experiences, we can actually affect real change, whether that's change in our health service or change in our professional environment or change within our sort of expectations of family. Those things happen once people are honest about what they're experiencing, and that honesty is only ever helped by having a sort of shared language, which is hopefully what the book gives people. I kind of thought, if I say all the worst, most embarrassing taboo things for you, then you can just relate to my book.
If you had this code phrase, let's talk about the circumstances in which you'd use it. Say in a work setting, in an appraisal or a job interview, what would be the value of being able to say, look, I'm in my panic years?
Well, in my case, and probably the best way to answer this is what happened to me, that at 27 or 28, I sat down in a meeting with my boss and he said, where do you see yourself in 5 years' time? And at that point, I had the title of assistant editor. And I said to him, I would really like, by the time I'm 30, to have graduated beyond just the title of assistant. And that's not necessarily asking for more money or my own boss or someone to come in every 3 o'clock with a cup of tea in a sort of golden cup or anything particularly grand. It was more that then, if for whatever reason I leave that workplace, either to go on sabbatical or to have children or to do some traveling or because of health implications, whatever it is, when I re-entered the workplace, I am doing so with a certain authority and respectability and gravitas that I felt like I didn't have with just the title assistant. And I couldn't say to him at the time, I'm in the panic years, or I'm undergoing this transition that in the book I call the flux. And so it's sort of now or never. Like, this has to happen before the physiological or emotional or social deadlines make it impossible. instead I just had to sort of wincingly answer the question of where do you see yourself in 5 years, which always makes me feel like I'm in a kind of therapeutic situation. I'm about to start crying. It's really like, I honestly think, where are you in 5 years? Like, unless you are actually the Chancellor of the Exchequer, you just shouldn't ask a woman in her late 20s where she sees herself in 5 years. But anyway, I also think it would allow people to say, to bring up things like, what's my maternity package, even before you're thinking about getting pregnant, or what is the opportunity for retraining here, without, that it's almost like, if you set up that this period is one in which huge seismic and sometimes irrevocable changes happen, the groundwork to make those changes easier, more harmonious, more beneficial to everybody could happen a bit earlier, without you having to sort of, spill your guts out in front of your boss, which neither you nor the boss really want to happen.
And what about that other example? You're at a wedding in your late 20s and an aunt looks at you sideways and says something to you that really means, when are you going to get married and have kids?
That very meaningful look over a buffet table towards someone's swollen belly by your hairsprayed auntie who says, so, are you seeing anyone nice at the moment? And you just think, oh, I don't know if I can handle this. I think it would just, hopefully, if enough people had this code word and shorthand, you would start to build up a picture of what is and isn't upsetting thing to talk about in particular settings. Like, my friend said this brilliant thing, which is, when it comes to having babies or getting married or being in a relationship or a job or anything, you should only ask that question if you are absolutely ready and willing to hear whatever the honest answer is. So I'm very happy for someone to say to me, do you want to have another baby, for example, which is quite a controversial question. And I'm sort of in a very tricky position at the moment about that. I'm happy for them to ask me if they really want to sit down and get the full force of the answer. What I don't want is someone with a kind of tempura prawn and a glass of champagne to go, so do you want another baby? Oh, look, there's Julie, and run off. Like, that's the bit that's heartbreaking. And I also think, wouldn't it be lovely if there was a collection of bridesmaids who were all, instead of sweating away about whether their heels were going to sink into the grass or whether the dress was sort of showing off their love handles, could all sit around after the vows and after the first dance and really get into the sort of messy bits of their panic years, and the sort of, the brilliant illuminating detail of who's having terrible dates and who's who's having a disappointing period because they were hoping they were pregnant, and who is wondering about sleeping with a man called Brad who lives in an ambulance. Like, we could all have those much more rich textured conversations, because you could just say, how's everyone's panic years going? And they would be like, I know, because this happens to me since I've written the book every day, and in professional meetings and social occasions, such as they are at the moment. It's like an undoing of a corset when people really want to talk to you about what's happening to them. And I think if you can say how your panic is, the release and the relief that you're met with from other women, and it is primarily women, is just a beautiful, lovely, galvanizing thing to witness. Cisgendered men are basically conditioned to believe that they can have babies whenever they like, under any circumstances. They've got forever. There's this kind of Peter Pan culture that you don't be like Mowgli at the end of the Jungle Book and get tied down and dragged out of the jungle by some pot carrying wench. Like, you don't be tricked into settling down before you're really ready, which means that they don't have, they're not led to believe that there is this sort of biological deadline that once crossed cannot be reneged upon, which is definitely how I felt. Like, my mum got the menopause at 40, so I knew that once that came, there was no going back. Either it would be too late to have a baby, or I would have had the baby. And the joke is that male fertility absolutely decreases with age, just like women's. We don't know to what extent, and it's probably not the same, but it's comparative. And we also know that the quality of sperm decreases with age, and we know that they're more likely to be congenital difficulties and difficulty conceiving and all those things. So yes, while there will always be Mick Jagger, there will also be thousands of men who realize in their 40s that it's not going to happen for them. And that maybe if they hadn't put work or whatever, windsurfing or building their house ahead of having a family, maybe they would have had one if that's what they wanted to do. All of which is to say, people who choose to be child-free have my utmost respect. I think it's an incredibly responsible, right, healthy, good, stable, righteous decision. And I'm not by any means like a sort of baby making activist. I think live your life the way you want to live your life, but don't live your life under the misapprehension that you have forever. Because as one of the people in the book, I spoke to a brilliant psychologist, who said there are two absolute certainties in this world with the human body. One is that you will die, but the other is that at some point you will not be able to have children. And none of us know, or few of us know, when that point will come. And so you have to confront that reality at some point. And I would kind of like to weave that more into the male experience earlier on. And I think that means more male engagement with contraception. I think it means more male engagement with child rearing, fatherhood. I jokingly say that when I spoke to my partner, who is a man, do you want to have a baby? He said, I don't really know. And I thought that meant, I've spent the last 10 years really wrangling with the decision of whether I want to have children. Like you, I'm quite ambivalent because of various social and ecological reasons. And what he meant was, well, I've never really thought about that. I don't know. Like I've never babysat. I haven't really been asked it. My friends aren't really talking about whether they want to have kids. I don't know any fathers. I don't know. And so I sort of think that, although it's annoying for me, it also does a massive disservice to those men who are closed off from the sort of a really interesting creative potential in their life that they're sort of encouraged to think of as a bit of a drag. And I hate that, because having children isn't a drag. And it's certainly not more interesting than the trainers that you're wearing and the films that you're going to see.
It would be a mistake to see this book as purely angst about fertility. It's so much more than that. And it concludes with this punchline that the panic years don't necessarily end with the arrival of a partner or a pregnancy or even a baby.
Yes, isn't it a shame that that dilemma is not quieted by just the weight of someone else in your bed or someone chewing on your fingers? Because I like so many of my peers have had a child, but I'm now just sort of trying to navigate what comes next. Like, am I going to have another one? Can I wrangle my partner back into the idea of fatherhood again? Because he's absolutely sure that he wanted to stop at one. Is this time for me to retrain? Should I become a teacher? Should I move country? I've got a New Zealand passport. It would be a very good time to get out of England. Is this the time to do it? Is there something that I have this window of opportunity to set in motion that I will regret not doing? And I think also for my child-free friends, that decision, while is something that they're absolutely happy with and contented with and know is the right thing, there is also occasionally doubt and regret about what you've done. And I think that's a big taboo that is very tricky to talk about. But whether you have a child or not, there will be moments of doubt and regret about that decision. It doesn't go, the idea that it's a complete binary and once you do it, you are happy about it forever, really just it sort of silences the true experience of a lot of people, men and women. I definitely had moments at 4 a.m. with the sort of chewed nipples and hysterical sleep deprivation, like eating handfuls of fish fingers because I was so hungry and tired, where I'd think, I might have ruined my life. Yeah, I think I might have ruined my life, and I might have ruined my partner's life, and I might have ruined my career. I've certainly ruined my body. Like, maybe this wasn't the right thing to do. And I'm allowed to kind of express that. But if one of my child-free friends says on her 40th birthday, she looks at a baby and says, oh, I really sometimes I really regret not being a mother. Everyone feels this sort of horrible, palpable anxiety that, oh no, they've made the wrong decision and how we can't really bear the pain of that. But that will just be a temporary feeling. All feelings are temporary. And that doubt is temporary, anxiety is temporary, panic, even if in my book it takes 5 years, is not forever. It comes and goes. It's a funny state that we move in and out of depending on the other circumstances and the other things that are happening in our life. So yes, you might well go into it again at 40. My mum says though that after the menopause, she was so hot and she was so tired that she didn't really have time to panic about these things anymore, which is something to look forward to, right? When your hair is grey and your body has sort of moved on, that maybe the existential angst turns into something else.
Can I say when you're postmenopausal, you just do not care? All those hormones that have made you feel a certain way about things, you are suddenly relieved of those.
Oh, it's just glorious. My mum called it the Renaissance when she went through her menopause, that she suddenly had this like complete, like revivifying energy and like enthusiasm for the world, because she didn't care about things like whether people found her sexually attractive anymore. That wasn't the measure of her own success or worth in the world, which it shouldn't be for anyone. And yeah, like even I remember for about 6 months after I turned 30, I honestly started every sentence with speaking as a 30-year-old woman. And often what I was saying was, speaking as a 30-year-old woman, you're chatting a lot of shit to whoever was talking to me. And it was so, because I had this authority that I hadn't felt in my 20s. And if it keeps on at that pace, like roll on 70, because I'm just going to be like, I'm going to be this absolute foghorn of self-justification and sort of contentment. It'll be great.
Nell, great to talk to you. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you very much for having me. It's an absolute pleasure.